Hello? All right. Hello, welcome. So over 3 decades in Southern California, Jennifer Luce, FAIA, has developed her multidisciplinary architectural practice, Luce et Studio. The firm has most recently focused on the work on behalf of civic and arts institutions, creative sports spaces, residential design in the urban and rural context. A passion for the arts has led to numerous collaborations with primarily international female artists. A Canadian-born and trained architect, Jennifer began her career winning an international design competition for the Center for Innovative Technology, Washington, D.C., shortly after graduating from Carleton University, Ottawa. The CIT project became the first smart building in the U.S., executed as a partnership between Virginia academic institutions and the Virginia state government. Most recently, the studio completed a 7-year transformation of the Mingei International Museum in historic Balboa Park, San Diego. The $55 million comprehensive project has fundamentally grown the mission and presence of Mingei's collection and programming to the international stage, presenting a deeply cultural collection in the midst of a dynamic and thoughtfully crafted environment, all while respecting the context of a park on the National Register of Historic Places. Jennifer received her Master of Design Studies from Harvard University and sat on the GSD Alumni Council for 10 years, spearheading student mentorship programs. She currently contributes her time as a board member for Art of Elan, an organization committed to educating and exposing diverse audiences to contemporary classical music and commissioning new works for established and emerging composers. Education and exposure to the arts are themes that preeminate the work of the studio as well. Jennifer has been co-chair for the Monterey Design Conference 2 years running in partnership with the AIA California and architect Lawrence Scarpa, FAIA. She and her team have lectured at numerous academic institutions, including Harvard University, Virginia Tech, Iowa State University, and Stanford University, and have taken the role of visiting professor at Carleton and Stanford Universities. This studio has garnered 30 American Institute of Architects Awards, named Design Vanguard of the Year by Architectural Record magazine, and won a Business Week Design Excellence Award. The studio's work has been featured in the New York Times, Fast Company, Architectural Record, The Plan magazine, and Interiors, amongst numerous other publications. Luce Studio routinely uses new technologies and natural materials to innovate between the digital and the hand, seeking an authenticity that speaks to the tactility, sensuality, and narrative of contemporary life. And then, without further ado.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's really a pleasure. I was saying to my cohort, Rob, that this is really a moment to take a 7-year effort and pull it together as one narrative for you. And so it's really been the process of going down memory lane for Lori and I in the studio, putting this together for you. And it's really, frankly, only a snippet of everything that was accomplished. But because I'm here tonight with students who I'm passionate about, I wanted the presentation to be more conversation rather than a lecture. So I decided to invite the director of Mingei Museum, Rob Seidler, to join in the conversation about the project. I truly, truly believe in process as an important learning tool while you're in school. It's the one thing you take with you for the rest of your life, and I think the process of this project has been quite phenomenal over a 7-year period. But it's also about collaboration, and that's another thing that we believe really strongly in. And it's not just collaborating with consultants or the people within your studio. It's collaborating with your clients, and this has been just a phenomenal experience for me. And also collaborating in this case with artists, and this has brought me such joy. So we can't wait to tell you all about it. Do you want to introduce yourself, Paul?
Real pleasure to be here. I was so delighted when Jen asked me last week if I would join her. We've had a number of good conversations publicly through the 7 years together. My real role tonight will be to rave about what it means to work with a great architect. I really mean that.
That's wonderful. You know, projects take a long time, and you have to have patience and drive and a very clear intent when you're weathering through 7 years of meetings and process. And I'm just beginning to formulate a sort of quantitative document about this kind of thing. And today I shared with Robert, I counted, we did over 80 presentations to gain approval from everyone to build this project. That's a lot of presentations in 7 years. So I think we had 21 iterations of the drawings. I mean, it's just beyond belief. So anyway, let's go on a little adventure together, and Rob and I will tell you some stories. But we really believe that this project, amongst a few other very important ones in the city, such as the Shell, the Ray Shell, Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, the La Jolla Music Society building in La Jolla, are all projects that are going to elevate our understanding of our own city and how people from the outside understand us as well. We are a city of culture, and now is our moment. I truly, truly believe that. So here we are talking about art and civic space. So beginning a project, we look at context. So the context of the project is a museum of design, craft, and folk art in a historic park. And museums in parks are a very, very, very special breed of buildings. And so we really wanted to look outwards before we looked inwards to the project itself. So the context being this phenomenal historic park in the middle of our beautiful city. Just as a diagram, it's really, really remarkable. And happens to be a park that has hosted two expositions, world expositions. The first one being in 1915, the Panama, California exposition. Here's an overview of the exposition in 1915, just a really, really remarkable context in itself. You can see at the bottom part here, this is Alcazar Garden, beautiful garden that's actually now run by volunteers and kept up by them. And the building that Mingei exists in now is right there. This is the Mingei building from the plaza, and some beautiful drawings that we found of the facade itself. So we spent quite a bit of time, in fact months, doing this kind of research before picking up a pen to even think about what design would mean. So in the discovery, you find these wonderful surprises. And in this case, this is opening day 1915 of the exposition. There's the Mingei building, and where we have the little arrow, it's a hint to something I'm going to show you in a bit. It's a very exciting thing. You can see there are 4 women on the roof of the building. What did that mean? This beautiful notion of this incredible park running through our city, bringing us such joy, and over, is probably 40 institutions in the park at least?
About 16 museums.
16 museums, right.
And a good number of other institutions as well.
Right, and I don't think there are too many other cities, even in the world, that have such a thing. And then diving into the main area of the park, there's Plaza De Panama, and the yellow dot or yellow form is the location for Mingei. And we started to understand that Mingei sits between two landscapes. Here is Alcazar Garden, well actually three. Palm Canyon is here, and Plaza De Panama. So wow, what an opportunity. So we then research our client. And in this case, the client is Mingei International Museum, Museum of Craft, Design, and Folk Art, that was founded, and I'll ask Rob to say a little bit about this, an incredible history and a uniqueness in the sense that there's only one other Mingei museum, which is in Tokyo, and the other one is here in San Diego. Want to talk a little bit about Mingei?
Sure. The gentleman on the right is Soetsu Yanagi, who coined the word Mingei in 1924, meaning literally everybody's art, or what we often call art of the people. He was concerned about industrialization coming on full bore in Japan, and he felt there was a great chance that all the traditional crafts that were, some of them thousands of years old, like pottery in Japan, would be lost as they had been in Europe and America almost entirely with industrialization. So he encouraged people to continue to be attentive to these so-called arts of daily life, things that had never been called art before, but that because they'd been made for use by individuals rather than an assembly line, he thought they were particularly beautiful, made for use by the community, not so much for profit motive. And he called this Mingei. He and Kanjiro Kawai, a potter from Kyoto, and Shoji Hamada, a potter from Mashiko, founded the Mingei Association in 1926.
Here's the Mingei Museum in Tokyo, founded in 1936. A beautiful building. It's really a home.
It's a very, very beautiful place. And it's the inspiration for our own mission as a museum. This is Martha Longnecker, the founder of Mingei International in 1978. She was at that time the head of the pottery program at San Diego State University. She had come down in 1955 from Claremont, California, suburb of LA, and really developed the pottery program at SDSU. She had met Yanagi and Hamada and Bernard Leach in 1952 and had been greatly impressed by all that they were doing, and they by her. She had so caught what they were talking about that they invited her to come to Japan right away, but she realized she couldn't. She was a young mother, wife, and she had too many things that made it impossible then. But when she was invited to come down to San Diego and head the program, she said, aha, in 7 years, I can ask for a sabbatical, and I'm going to Japan. And that's exactly what she did.
I've never heard that story. So what results now is a museum nonprofit that sits in Balboa Park with over 25,000 objects of Mingei from 100, I said 146.
162 countries.
162, sorry. And so we'll just show you a couple of these objects. It's an absolute joy. If you ever knock on Rob's door and ask him to take you to the collection room, these giant drawers of the most amazing things that are so inspiring.
Anytime, just ask, please. It's a pleasure. Wonderful bowl by Laura Andresen, who taught at UCLA for many years, more than 5,000 students. And she was Martha Longenecker's first pottery teacher. We have a large collection of her work. Wonderful Japanese doll. one of the things that for me is the essence of Mingei. Absolutely a tool, and yet really very beautiful and very beautifully made out of the simplest materials. This is Mingei.
So the beginning is really looking inward to the client, to the collection, to the mission of the museum. And I'll tell you a little bit how the project actually began. It was an RFP, a request for proposal, for a replacement of the floor, a replacement of the lighting, and adding some storage to the museum. And that $3 million project turned into a $55 million project. And that wasn't because we were over budget, by the way. It was because we had a conversation that led to opportunity. Opportunity for the museum to grow, to expand, to expose itself to community, to the city, and to the world, really. And it was just a wonderful conversation. I truly believe in those kinds of dialogues about possibilities. And Rob, his team, and the board of directors came along through that conversation to build a program that was completely different than any of us ever imagined. And so this is why I'm kind of really encouraging this notion of research and thinking very early on in a project before you begin to design anything, because it will take you to places that you never imagined.
Jen, may I say a word about
course.
that? When Jen got the job from us, we had these 12 projects that needed to be done. And she talked to every staff member over a 3-month period, all through the summer, asked each one individually what was working in the museum, what was not working so well, and what are our individual dreams for how the museum might function better. And at the end, she came back to the board and to the management team and proposed this rethinking, said stop thinking about 12 discrete projects. She had heard what we were really asking for, but we didn't know. We were implying, so much so that the board, after very brief discussion, you remember, Jen, they said yes, even though it went from probably $3 or $5 million to what was going to be 25 or 30 million. And yet they said yes, because it made such sense to all of us. That's what listening is all about.
Right. So you're proposing something new, hopefully innovative. Where do you go next? Exploration. So we actually realized that the museums of the 21st century are very different than museums of any other time. They are places of gathering and socializing, learning as community. They're meant to be more inclusive and open and transparent. And so we really wanted to understand what that meant globally. So we went on a number of trips. I think we need to count those two, probably 7 or 8 trips around the world with specific people on the team or on the board. And we discovered so many fantastic things. And everybody recorded these ideas in their heads, and they would just pop out at a board meeting or a meeting between us. So exploration. I use this example because I think the New Whitney is one of the most phenomenal museums today. It's humble in a way. It's not meant to be seen as a building itself. It's meant to be seen as an organism within the community, and it's just phenomenal. This idea that you can come out of a gallery and stand on a terrace is just amazing, and really understand where you are. We also refer to this thing called the culture track, which is just fascinating, even if you're not working in the cultural world. It's something that's published every 2 years, and it talks about trends in the cultural scene. So what kinds of exhibits are people going to? How many people are going to natural history museums versus contemporary art museums? And it really was a very educational tool. So researching those kinds of entities who are already doing research is really, really. And then we went on expeditions that included, and Rob, you're going to love these photos, that included conversations. And I decided to take some friends along the way too, to see what their impressions would be. So on the left, we're at the Whitney, looking out the window to the river, which is just phenomenal. On the right, we're at the FOG, the Harvard Art Museum by Renzo Piano, which has the most stunning courtyard. We're all looking up at it in awe. And in the middle is my friend Claude Cormier, who's a very, very astute landscape architect from Montreal, who came along for the ride and presented some ideas to Rob very early on that I think we still would like to accomplish. But it's these kinds of just conversations about things you never imagined you would see. Exploration includes very intimate spaces, like going into every bathroom we could possibly do in a museum and understanding what that means as an experience. Sitting in installations at the V&A in London and at the Longhouse in Long Island, where Mingei's surf, Jacqueline Larson,
the great textile design where he lived.
And Mingei's surf exhibit ended up there. So how did we conclude these explorations and go back to the board and talk about it? These were the main themes of how we think museums are changing. So we have connections to the urban context. So the museums are not hermetically sealed anymore. They're opening themselves up. Engaging with exterior public spaces. Places like the Met in New York are opening up gardens and plazas. Civic openness and light-filled spaces. Spaces that show art don't need to necessarily be sealed in from natural light. And that gives you a sense of where you are. Making social life, so this SF MoMA before its recent renovation. Cross-pollination of program, I think it's something in the architectural world that we do a lot of naturally, but in institutions often these functions are separated from each other, but if they can live together, they can create new things together. New program, and we certainly added that. Revealing the collection. If you go to the Broad, there's a little peephole. You can look down to the collection room. There's a curiosity about how art is made, where it's stored, how is it dealt with. Circulation, that's exciting. Digital alternatives, obviously very, very important. And the Cooper Hewitt was one of the most intense ones that we saw. Authenticity of material, and strengthening identity in your cultural context. So we did this thing that we had never done before, and I think it was surprising to you as well. It's really quite rational, and I'm not known for being so rational, but we did a mind map, and Mingei was in the middle, and it's 5 tenets or mission statements were surrounding it. And then we expand that to all the ways that we could express Mingei's mission. And it's really, really important not only to understand who your client is, but what their intent is, because our job is to really express that, strengthen it. And so we realized how complicated this project was just by doing this diagram. And then playing around with it, writing notes on it, trying to make sense of it. And it was all a dialogue. It was a conversation again.
We didn't know what we were really doing with this. It was so complex, you know. But I was reflecting with Jen tonight how immensely valuable that process, that effort of building that was.
I think I had that circular map on near my desk the entire time we were working together. So for instance, this one is about Mingei, Art of the World, How to Be Civic, How to Open the Museum to the Park and to the World, and then a whole series of potential initiatives. And we kept building on those over time until it was like mind-boggling. Never mind mind mapping. Explaining Mingei. What is Mingei? Well, it's not your typical museum. So how can we help to describe it better as an architecture? We call it Mingei's mission optimistic and inspirational, an evolving perspective. And we have all sorts of different options here. And it goes through the narrative, the organization, the sensory spaces, which are all here. And then we tried to connect those to the things we were seeing in the world about new museums and started to make some connections that made a lot of sense. So I think at this point we're at month 6 or 8, and we still haven't drawn anything. And that to me was really, in some ways, uncomfortable, but right. And then you can see the 4 pillars of Mingei: sensory-rich, optimistic, inspirational, functional and beautiful, humble and personable. What wonderful things to have to be dealing with when designing a building. So let's go back to the building, to the context. And I think all of this led to this notion about opening up physically, psychologically, and yet we had this hermetically sealed, frankly, exhibition building that was a Hollywood set, where the windows weren't even windows, and the doors weren't even doors. It was really just for show. So how physically we felt like we were pushing our elbows against the walls. How could we get this place to open up to our community? So together we found 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, in the end 8 or 9 new entrances to the museum. So the idea of throwing open the doors, it sounds really simple, but it's really powerful to just open the door and ask someone to come in. So we basically took the facade and penetrated it in any place that we could, especially along the arcade to the plaza. So now at night, light is emitted out of the building to the plaza, signaling something really interesting is happening here. You want to talk about the ground floor and open it?
Yes. We decided early on that the plaza level, this ground level, would become free and open to the public at all times as a major initiative to truly open to the public. We said we're a museum of art of the people from all over the world. We need to make sure that we're connecting with all the people and that the people of San Diego really know that this museum belongs to them. It's theirs. So this was a major initiative to accomplish that.
So the ground floor affectionately was called the living room of the park because there are almost no other places you could go into a building and not have to pay to be there. So it is free and open to the public. There's a beautiful big open space with a public gallery so that you can begin to understand, to look at the objects and begin to understand them. There's an education center for children, youth, and adults. There's a wonderful cafe. There's Shop Mingei, which is this beloved shop full of amazing handmade things. And there's a coffee bar on the corner. Coffee always is an attractive thing in a building, but in this case it's really powerful because it sits on the corner of the plaza. So we clarified our aspirations over 7 years. One was to blur the boundaries, intersect program, open the museum, make a civic living room, add public landscape. So we actually added square footage to Balboa Park, which felt like a really generous gift to the city. And we reclaimed lost spaces. So I'll go back to that hint of the women on the roof We found, well, 3 particular spaces that had never really been used in the building, but now are some of the most joyous ones. So let's start with one, blurring boundaries. And so we discovered that on the south side of the building was a loading dock, and it wasn't historic. So we went to the historic board and said, could we add a building? It's pretty radical in Balboa Park. And they said yes, pretty quickly, right?
Yes, well, the city had put in the loading dock when the building was redone, rebuilt historically on the outside as it was in 1915, but they made 4 floors within, and there would be 3 tenants in the building. So they wisely put in a loading dock, but the landscape there is very steep, so that it was a very tough entrance down into the loading dock, and it was quite small. So a big truck with a traveling exhibition couldn't come in, nor could it be very well accessed. So we were able to convince our colleagues, the Old Globe and San Diego Art Institute, to let us take that space and actually put a new theater there. And they agreed that it wasn't serving very well as a loading dock. Why don't we do that? So we were very fortunate. We had really good fellow tenants.
So this is the new theater, and it's a programmatic element that allows so much to intersect. The idea of classroom education, presentation, performance, and display. And it is truly being used that way. It's so wonderful to watch that it's booked up, I think, every day for the rest of the year, which is amazing. So it's a theater, multi-purpose room, and it sounds like a simple thing, but for this museum it was huge. They didn't have this kind of space. So here's a sectional diagram of the theater down at the loading dock level, using the roof as a new courtyard for Balboa Park, and opening up the theater to the landscape of Palm Canyon. Some really early renderings of how that would feel. We looked at Tanglewood to think about theaters with open glass walls that can expand and contract and either let the outside in or protect you from it. Another rendering of it from the outside. So it's nestled into the corner of the building. It's respectful of history and the history of the place, and yet it's unbelievably active because we built a sidewalk along this edge, and people just stop with their dogs and their cats and their kids, and they watch performances happen, they clap, they participate, and this is exactly what we wanted to happen. So here's an aerial view of that outdoor space with an amphitheater. A very, very simple idea that turned out to be very powerful. So here with even the construction of the space itself, because it was within a very confined area, was really fascinating to watch and very participatory for the whole team. And here's the theater from the inside looking out.
On that south end of the theater here was the final big initiative or idea that you had, Jen, and it was so brilliant that we could open up and truly expand the capacity of the auditorium, which is 120 seats inside. But with these 3 retaining walls that were needed to support the hill, we were able to actually make it into an amphitheater as well. So we can have indoor, outdoor performances or seating outside.
I think mentioning that the glass came very late, I think it's really important because we're dealing with so many governmental entities that we actually decided to pace the decision making. And so you perform a little bit of restraint in the work in that you just to get the theater approved was one thing. And then to have it be made of concrete was another thing. And then to add the windows was another thing. So that's 3 presentations out of the 80 in themselves. So it was really, really carefully strategized to be gentle as a decision-making process. There it is from the sidewalk. And I'll talk about a couple of the elements of the space in a bit. The other thing was opening up the community and having the plaza level, the commons level, feel comfortable and engaging. And so over the cafe and the shop, we institute sort of an indoor-outdoor canopy idea. So going back to some of those initial images that we saw, this one always caught our eye. What this canopy was just so fascinating on the outside of a museum building. And so we started to think, how can we make a canopy indoors that would feel like you were outdoors and really bring that sense of openness to the commons level. And so this was something we knew we were going to do, but actually didn't do until the very end of the project, because sometimes I'm sure everyone has this feeling where an idea is coming, but it hasn't come yet. And so we put it aside and thought, okay, at some point, an idea for this canopy will come forward. And I love that about the process of design, that something, a memory of an experience is in the back of your head and it comes forward. And it did. And it was my first meeting with Rob at his house. He played his player piano for me. And I watched the roll go through the piano. I remember being so fascinated by it. So the canopy turns out to be an actual song that you play on your player piano, but rendered in stainless steel. So there is this interesting digital quality to something that was maybe invented 100 years ago.
Yes, oh yeah, at least.
And so in many of the aspects of the museum, we're starting to talk about how the digital life that we live now is related to the hand and making things by hand. Whereas Yanagi was thinking about industrialization and the hand. Here we are at the digital point in history. So this really felt interesting. So there's the ceiling, rendered in stainless steel, and it actually is the song. The A. Zahner and Company of Kansas City, who we work with a lot, metal workers, they didn't want to fake it. They actually wanted us to have the whole song, and it's there. What song is it on?
It's called What Are You Doing the Rest of Your Life? It's a 1969 song. Michel Legrand, original music, and lyrics by Alan and Marilyn Bergman, famous American songwriters.
So each of the elements in the building are related to a level of craft that describes also the mission. And music is, in some ways, it's a craft in its own, so we wanted to celebrate that. Added public landscape. So this is the roof of the theater, and it's around 2,000 square feet, beautiful, intimate space, but it's really adding a really wonderful thing that really doesn't exist in the park, this sort of intimate, enclosed courtyard. Here were some early renderings of what that might feel like with what I described that piece on the
Yes,
left.
that is actually there now. It is called Variations on the Gold Theme. It is work by Ella Marie and Jackson Woolley, famous internationally as enamelists, but they were right here in San Diego. This was made by them in 1965 and was there for 30 years on the First National Bank building downtown under the entrance cove. And when Union Bank bought the building, they took it down, renovated, And we were still banking with Union Bank then, and it was very fortunate it came to us. So, it's a marvelous piece.
So throughout,
copper enamel.
yeah, so throughout the project, we worked closely with you to find homes for these permanent pieces, right? Nighttime movie night, and there's a piece installed. It's really, really spectacular. So, go back to the rendering. We had always intended for this space to just flow into the park, but the Parks and Rec people said no, it needs to be secure. And we resisted until we really thought about MoMA's courtyard in New York and how it is enclosed, but it's open and free to the public. And so we thought, okay, well, we can make that happen. So we said, if you want a fence, we'll give you a fence. And we drew this fence with vertical lines. Well, they were a little squiggly, but I don't think anyone quite realized what they were about to get. So working with Abe Zahner again, and trying to really grasp this idea of working with digital technology and handmade things, we started to think about a fence that would emulate some of these forms, beautiful Japanese candles, sculpture, and wrapping. So we developed a series of 65 pickets. They're all individually shaped and digitally cut on a CNC. They're 3/4 inch solid brass. But then hand finished and hand turned. Unbelievable process. It's almost prehistoric, but wonderful in itself. And so each one of the elements in the museum has a story like this of working with the craftsperson. And that just once again goes to your mission and really expanding the idea of the intent. There's the courtyard at night. William. Reclaiming lost spaces. So I'll get to the hint in a minute, but this one was a bell tower that was clearly on the outside of the building, but no one really could understand where it was on the inside because it was completely enclosed. So we're breaking through drywall to find this unbelievable tower with a skylight that no one had ever really accessed, right? So we thought, let's celebrate that and have that be the stair from the main level up to the gallery level on the second level. There's the traditional bell tower on the outside, and within the tower itself, we celebrate another work of art that is in the collection.
A great chandelier in 498 pieces of glass, blown glass by Dale Chihuly, the great Seattle artist. And it's been in our collection since 2005. This is now the third place that it's been hung. We think we have the ideal setting for it at last.
I actually think it's my favorite Chihuly ever. So, as architects, how do you house a work of art? It's a big responsibility. So we wanted to take this very traditional square bell tower and begin to form it so that it could become this beautiful cocoon, essentially, for the work of art. So the art really inspires the work. So we began modeling options of how we could generate interesting space, but also honoring the piece itself. And rendering of how you even enter the bell tower should be mysterious and curious and draw you up to the galleries to see all of the art. And so here is that series of steps that go up to the bell tower itself, and on the right, the Chandelier hanging in this twisted tower made of Venetian plaster, all hand done by a young craftsman who wasn't sure that he could actually do it. And so he kept making mock-ups for me to look at every Friday, and he put a light on it. Is this what you want? And we finally got to the one, and he's so proud to have made this. And I think it's just an expansion of the idea of working with a hand is so gratifying. There's looking straight up. We had to actually work with Chihuli's main installers to work through the lighting design. They won't let you just light it yourself. You have to work with them. It was a really wonderful educational process. There it is from the top, from the gallery level. So, okay, let's go back to the hands. All right. So on the terraces, we see these women all dressed up, and okay, what's there? We haven't been there either. So Rob takes us out onto this rickety roof, actually two of them, and we decide, looking back at the Whitney and the terraces looking onto Gainsborough, why shouldn't we be looking down on Plaza De Panama in a beautiful setting?
The city, when they rebuilt the building in 1995-96, did not engineer the terraces for the public, though they had been used that way in the original building. So for the last 22 years that we were in the building, we were never able to have the public out there. We had a loan site collection there. We kept it in storage and being cared for, but no public use of it at all. The board was determined that we were going to make sure we could use the terraces. So that was a really important decision.
So two terraces, one larger one that's an L shape and one smaller one here. This is the gallery level, so beautiful large gallery. The bead gallery here. This is the founders gallery with the beautiful Nakashima table that we added an expansion to. And the library at the top, which I cannot believe I didn't bring pictures of the library, but I'll come back and do a full talk about the library. So here are some early renderings. And, you know, just to reiterate, all of these ideas are coming over time. So a 7-year process actually doesn't feel very long because each year you find a new initiative and you've got to go, you know, sell it on the street and then execute it. So it was a wonderful project of just building over time. Here, we had our first office gathering on the terrace just as a little celebration of being out of lockdown.
This is well, you're looking down toward the library in that last one, now looking across the front.
So, library should be there. So I'll come back to that. But I think a really, really satisfying thing for me, and I know for you, was to integrate the work of artists in the building. And not just as art on the walls, but art as intrinsic to the architecture. So, and then taking that one step further and saying, Mingei is art of useful daily use, then these artworks should also be useful to the building and to its occupants.
Becomes part of the fabric or the functioning of the museum.
So from the very beginning of this project, I had a list on the corner of my desk of all these wonderful people around the world making craft in a contemporary way. And they all just happen to be women. And so we commissioned a whole group of women. And you have taken many of those pieces into the fold of your collection.
Yes, indeed. They're all being accessioned.
So this idea of being the catalyst for someone's work, I mean, and now I understand your work and how important that is. and just supporting the artists as architects was profoundly satisfying for us. So here are all the artists, and pretty fun to see. Sharon Stafford's up on the left. She worked for us for 14 years as an architect and is now a metal jewelry artist. So we wanted to celebrate her transition to doing that kind of work. There's your catalyst, and Todd Williams and Billy Scan. We commissioned Billy, but Todd, it's just they're not coming along, but he's fabulous. Christina Kim, Korean artist from Los Angeles. Claudia Youngstra, felting artist from the Netherlands. And Petra Bley, curtain designer, architectural curtain designer from Amsterdam. So within the context of making a building, now you've got 6 more projects to deal with that each took over a year and a half to do together. But unbelievably collaborative, all during COVID, all Zoom, just amazing what everyone was able to accomplish from afar. So Petra was commissioned to make the curtain for the theater, and it had to be acoustic because it was going to take on a huge chunk of the acoustic engineering for the room. And what she came up with is so stunningly beautiful. She studied San Diego. She loved Kate Sessions, read all about Kate, who was a horticulturalist. She planted over 300 trees in Balboa Park. She brought the Jacaranda tree to San Diego, and so that's where Petra's work began. So here's a first rendering from her of the idea for the curtain in the theater. But some early drawings, some modeling, and some mock-ups. They are the abstract rendition of the Jacaranda leaf. Unbelievable, bright Ellsworth Kelly blue, just super amazing. And we must have gone through 10 to 15 iterations of this. And in the end, at the very last minute, she added a gray layer on the back of the curtain. And we ended up using the gray inside the room and the blue outside, so that the blue would go to the trees. Mock-ups in Amsterdam. A rendering of how it would look on the outside. And there it is in reality with the doors open of the theater.
It's really stunning. I don't think we've shown it that way yet for an event, but that's just terrific.
There's just this surprise. There's something about surprise in architecture that is so wonderful, where you make something that reacts to light in a way you never imagined. And I'm sure she was just blown away by this. So many of these artists haven't seen their work yet, which is going to be an exciting moment. We're going to have a giant girls' dinner party.
I better be allowed.
You want to talk about Claudia?
Oh, Claudia Youngstra. We have been able to meet. She came and visited before COVID, wonderful introduction to her. She raises this rare breed of sheep, what they call Drenthe.
Drenthe, right.
It's quite rare, and she takes the wool and then grows on her property in northern Holland all the herbs and other plants that she makes natural colors from, and makes these marvelous felt works of art that, in our case, acts as an acoustic curtain. Once again, it's part of the fabric of the museum, but a glorious work of art as well.
It's named Truth and Beauty in Black, and she's studying the color black from Flemish paintings with the Rijksmuseum. And the truth is that black isn't black. And the piece today sits over the cafe, and if the lights are off, it is pure black. With the spotlights on it, you can begin to see indigo blue, yellow. It's really, really, really remarkable. Here's a piece being produced. So all we could see were photographs because we couldn't get there and she couldn't get here. She's an amazing climate change activist, sustainability queen, and her biggest dream was to sail this here on a sailboat from the Netherlands, but we didn't manage to do that because of weather and a few other things. But it's 35 feet long, and there it is over the bar.
Photograph.
I mean, look at all the colors in that. It's just incredible. And acoustically, it's perfect.
There you see the pickets of the fence in the courtyard being reproduced in miniature as taps for the cafe behind the bar. Quite wonderful.
I'm waiting for the beer to be filled.
Right.
The cafe is incredible. It's called Artifact.
It's Artifact at Mingei, and it's open for lunch 5 days a week and for dinner on Thursday and Friday right now.
All ingredients drawn from the collection, the cultural collection, and
Very sensitive to world cuisine. It's really exciting, connected with our mission. All done by Urban Kitchen Group, Tracy Borderman.
This is Christina Kim. She's Korean. She lives in Los Angeles. She had a fashion line for over 30 years called Dosa, and now she's doing installations with museums. And we love this idea of people who sort of transport their knowledge from one discipline to another, which I think is something that architects do quite a bit, and we do very well. So this is Christina on the left at one of her exhibitions at the Cooper Hewitt in New York, where I ran into her and we were piling pillows on top of each other, And we commissioned her initially to do one project that turned into 3, actually. This is a study of papel picado, which is a Mexican tradition of hand-cutting paper. And we had commissioned her to make some window frames, so infill of windows to diffuse light. And these are cut out of Japanese paper. And the interesting thing about Christina is that she works with craftspeople all over the world, primarily India, Asia, and Mexico. But during COVID, she couldn't do any of that. So she literally set up a new studio for this project in Los Angeles to do everything herself. And she told me yesterday that the curtains, which I'll show you alone, were over 4,000 hours of execution, never mind design. So really, really amazing. So these picado pieces were set for the Nakashima Founders Gallery, where the beautiful table is set, and we wanted to diffuse the light to protect the room. So here are images of George Nakashima's hand drawings of trees. So she met with Mira Nakashima, George's daughter, and gained the rights to reuse these drawings and reinterpret them. So there's one of the windows on the left that this fills, and from morning to night it changes completely. Here's a drawing of a walnut tree, California walnut, that went into the window on the left. Here's the room, which feels like a church to me.
This is, I call it the temple.
Throughout the museum, you see pieces from the collection, furniture pieces, that are not meant to be just looked at. They're meant to be used. And this is such a beautiful offering, I think, of the museum to the
That's what Mingei is about, objects of use. So we try to have as many of those available for people to handle or enjoy sitting on or use.
The amazing thing about this table is there's the original length, and it's a board table. So the board is grown, so we wanted to grow the table. So commissioned Mira Nakashima, George's daughter, to do 2 additions on the ends. And this was such a great project for her to really interpret the work from, but this table was made in the 80s?
No, she actually did this based on her father's
design, right.
This was done in 96.
30 chairs, 30 Conroy chairs of the same design, but all from different eras, and therefore they look completely,
Some of them are 70 years old, some are 25 years old, some are 7 months old.
So there's the room. And you can walk in and touch and feel, which is just so rare in a museum. So then the other assignment we gave her is every museum we went to, we realized people were installing exhibitions and dismantling exhibitions and putting up these terrible walls to hide the view of the process. And since we're all about process, we wanted people to have a sneak peek at how all of that happens. So we commissioned Christina to do a series of curtains that were translucent, that would allow you to see the work happening but not feel like it was too messy. Well, she took that on full bore. And going back to her Korean roots of, I don't think the term for this kind of curtain. Anyway, she deals in scraps. So she connected with a company that makes camping tents. And they use a fabric called Dyneema that's actually metal. And she was able to access a series of scraps to make her interpretation of the Korean curtain on the left. And so here's the rendition. So these are meant for functional use, to be used only when exhibitions come up and down. But the first one went up and we're like, oh my God, this is so beautiful, we have to keep it. So
we have one of them all the time. It's just such a wonderful addition to the gallery. They do give a kind of privacy to the staff who's working behind them, and yet it also draws the attention of visitors who want to peek through all of that, and they can see what's going on. The public is always more interested in what's being put up or taken down than in the actual exhibition. It's a wonderful thing.
Another Nakashima bench, beautiful object. And then within that room, Sharon on the left, who some of you might recognize, was commissioned to do a handle for the door, the sliding door. A simple assignment. Well, you can make that simple assignment something quite phenomenal. So the idea is, this is the map from New Hope, Pennsylvania, where Nakashima studio is, to San Diego. And so the door handle is the shape of the journey. And it also relates to the elevation of the land. So here are some early studies, the idea of the route that she actually drove, because she moved to Pennsylvania from here, and some modeling. She cast the piece herself in bronze. There were a lot of tears and late nights, I think. There it is on the door itself. It's really, really a stunning piece. If you think about someone going from being an architect to a jewelry artist, there's a vast scale difference. And yet she seems to be able to mediate it between the two in the assignment of the handle. So we're thinking about things down to the handle for 7 years. That's why I think I'm going on vacation next week. And then Billy Xian, Billy came to my school at Carleton and lectured. I think she was in her 20s. And I never forgot that. And when I moved to the United States, I called her and connected with her, and we've been friends ever since then. She is so wonderful, inspirational, and I get teary-eyed when I think about the influence that she's had on my life. And I really wanted this to be a celebration of her talents. And so Rob and I talked about having her make the gallery bench. So most museums have kind of an official bench. And
So we've always been told that we didn't have enough seating for our public, for our guests. So Jen made sure that we got that taken care of with this project.
So she went back to her Chinese heritage and ancient root benches that were made, root stools that are made out of the roots of trees. And rather than make a bench that is a root, she celebrates the root. So I'll take you on a little journey there. We went to New Jersey to her woodworking shop, and there was a root hanging in the ceiling that was like 15 feet tall, and it had been there for 35 years. And they pulled it down on the rig, and we started sawing away at it to find the root shapes that made sense. And then placing them on a simple bench and celebrating the root as an object of natural beauty. Here's Todd working away with Stephen, the woodworker. They had both had their knees replaced during COVID and also kind of needed that functional like push-up and get up from the bench, so there was that additional. So here are the three benches. Rob is sitting on this one. Oh, and that is the library. Okay, good. Two benches with wooden, beautifully handled wooden roots by Stephen, and then one bench that has a root that's cast in bronze. And it's stunning. It's
White bronze.
White bronze.
So beautiful.
The benches themselves are made here, and so the project's called East West, and they're made out of reclaimed incense cedar from the Paradise Fire. So we work very closely with a craftsman in the mountains above Temecula, and he saves wood from destruction essentially throughout California. And he had these beautiful cedar logs. So it's really a collaborative process, which of course Billy would do. She's just so generous in that way. What is the reaction of the public?
Oh, the public is using them. That's what's wonderful. They're very beautiful. So simple, clean, exquisite.
So I would say we've shown you a dozen initiatives within the project. There's a dozen more, and you have to come and visit, actually. You should all just have a tour together and have Rob get it to you. It's really, really fantastic.
Do come, and don't hesitate to ask for me. I'll be thrilled to take you around.
So Mingei, Art of the People, for the People, a museum as a civic space. We feel like these are the things we've accomplished. It's accessible and democratic, produced by handcraft and made from authentic materials. Many of the materials were sourced by generational companies, family businesses that have been doing things for hundreds of years. And we really wanted to work with those kinds of craftspeople to further their traditions and their knowledge. Objects of great function and daily use, representations of regions and traditions, and deeply rooted practices in cultural craft. So what an honor to be an architect molding a building that celebrates craft. I kind of feel like I should retire now because like, that's it. That's it.
No, we hope you don't.
43 years of Mingei International. 153 years of Balboa Park is quite a combination. And if we look back to the original observations from our travels, we feel like we've not only accomplished all of them, but really expressed them quite beautifully. So here was the raising of the steel beams in the theater. It's pretty celebratory. All the design team, the curatorial team, many of the donors were there. Just a wonderful, wonderful moment in time. Thank you.